Welcome back to my channel The Bleach Fanfiction. Join us as we explore the world of fanfiction and fantasy and bring you the best story and discussions. This is the second part of What If Ichigo was transformed into two entities. So give this video a like and subscribe for more videos in future. So let's get into the fanfic. Ichigo groaned in the middle of math class just as Rukia's phone went off. Verena blinked in surprise as she too felt it. A hollow was nearby. It's not a very strong one, she thought as she continued her classwork. Out of her peripheral vision she saw Ichigo toss back Khan's soul mod candy. Taking soul form, Ichigo quickly took off out of the classroom window towards the park. Geesh, Khan complained quietly. He just had to leave me in this boring class. Khan, hush. Verena chastised the soul mod. That was when Khan noticed Rukia was sitting in the classroom. Feeling suddenly nervous, he quietly whispered to Verena. Psst. What's she doing here? He asked her. Getabushi sent her here, she whispered back as she reached over to Ichigo's desk and snatched up his notebook and began taking notes for them both. Khan wasn't much of a note-taker or a test-passing kind of guy. He was handy to have in a pinch and could fight, as long as he didn't get hit on the head or in the stomach. He could be reliable, though he was a big pervert. Turning her attention back to the teacher, Verena ignored the itchy feeling of needing to go help her brother. Behind her, Rukia wrote down the events of the day in a report format for Captain Yhwach. If I ever get back to Soul Society, I need to ensure that my captain is well informed about these two. No, she thought back to the man they called Getabushi. She knew who he really was, Yhwach, who was wanted in the connection of the deaths and holification of Captain Shinji Hirako, Captain Rojuro Odoribashi, Captain Kensei Mugiroma, Captain Love Kawa, and the 4 lieutenants that were with them of the night that Yhwach and his companion Tessai Tsukabashi. There are 4 people I must watch now. She tapped her pencil on her booklet and frowned. She'd discover both men along with 2 children, Yururu and Jinta, living in the Candy Shoten. They're not even trying to hide. She paused in tapping her pencil. Do they want to be found? She shook her head. No. Then why are they not in hiding? I've got to find out what Yhwach's connection with these 2 is. Ichigo sighed as he landed on the ground after having run using flash step to get to the park. Huh. There's usually a child playing nearby. He thought this as he entered the park. The only thing he could hear was the wind. Feeling with his senses, he felt something rushing towards him from the right side of the park, near the playground. It was then he saw the giant spider-like hollow chasing after the spirit child of a 5-year-old boy. He'd seen the child a few times before. I've gotta help him. He felt both of his inner spirits agree with him on his assessment. He couldn't let that boy die. Jumping over the barrier fence, Ichigo pulled Zangetsu off of his back and slammed the blade into the face of the hollow without much thought of his safety. Blood splattered onto the ground and around the hollow's now cracked mask. The boy gave a gasp of surprise. He had thought that he was going to die for good this time. Putting his hands over his head, he gave a slight cry of fear as he felt pressure pushing against his body. Slashing in a downward stroke, Ichigo sliced the beast in half. The monster vanished into dust. Looking down upon the frightened child spirit, Ichigo bent down to him. Hey kid, he spoke, causing the boy to look up at him before smiling through his tears. You okay? The boy nodded. Thanks to you, mister, he answered as he turned himself around and sat in front of Ichigo. Good. Iconic touched the boy's head. You know, it's not safe here like it used to be. He looked off into the distance. Maybe you'd be happier somewhere else. Where? The boy asked curiously. I want to send you to Soul Society, Ichigo told him, but saw the sudden look of fear upon the child's face. But only if you agree to go. The boy looked off towards the playground. I like to play, but I have nobody to play with anymore. He looked back towards Ichigo. Will I have friends there? Ichigo scratched the back of his neck. Sure, If you know how to make friends, he told the boy nervously. I've never actually been there myself. The boy cocked his head at that. But I've heard good things about the place. Really, King? He heard his hollow ask him. All the Vizards hate that place. They're biased to that. He countered back to the white-haired doppelganger. Yoruchi has good things to say about it. Plus, it has to be safer than this place. He was met with silence for a moment. True. The hollow agreed before sinking back into the background. Okay, mister, the child agreed. I'll go. Maybe I'll find my grandfather there. He died before I did. Ichigo smiled at the boy's optimistic outlook. Okay, he said as he tapped the butt end of his sword's hilt to the child's forehead. The 5-year-old child glowed brightly before becoming translucent and disappearing into a burst of energy that vanished on the wind. Placing Zangetsu upon his back, he turned around and smiled at the two people standing there. Yo, Shinji. Rose. The short-haired blonde grinned at him. Thought we sensed something going on here, he stated. The long-haired blonde pulled his sunglasses off of his eyes. We were in the area and thought we'd check in to see what the commotion was all about. Minor level hollow. Ichigo told the two. Though you might want to be careful about walking around for a while. Both raised their eyebrows at him. Why? What's going on? Shinji inquired as he pulled his newsboy cap off of his head before inspecting it. A Shinigami is in town, he said. She got hurt protecting Karen. Getabushi fixed her up, but she's not any better. Something about flooding her Shinigami powers in the process, though the hollow that attacked her did not leave any trace of itself behind on her. So, I'm not sure what happened. Urahara helped her? Rose inquired, sounding surprised. Looking towards his companion, he continued. Guess we can't walk around like we like. He turned his head back to Ichigo. You'll be coming by this weekend, right? Ichigo grinned. Of course, he said, this sounding a bit excited. You two just better be ready to get your asses handed to you. Cocky kid. Shinji chuckled as he and Rose left him behind in the park. Ichigo looked up at the clear blue sky and decided to head over to the Shoten and question Urahara on where he planned to have that Rukia girl stay. It better not be where I think it is. He thought as an annoyed look crossed his face as he took off using his fastest flash step. Verena had, for her own sanity, tuned Rukia out, for the most part, the moment she'd begun speaking on the walk to Urahara's Shoten after school. Khan, on the other hand, was actively talking to the Soul Reaper. She had begun to talk about how mods like Khan were illegal and that she'd been informed that they'd been destroyed. Khan going full throttle on her and explaining his situation. Verena was about to put in her earbuds when she saw Yoruchi in her cat form watching them. She waved Khan to continue onward as she went to see what the Catwoman wanted. Rukia eyeing her as she went over to the cat, stopping her conversation with Khan. Something wrong, Yoruchi? She asked as she bent down to the black cat and began to scratch her behind her ears. Keeping an eye on our new friend is all, she stated as she began to purr at the petting she was receiving. Verena glared at her. A warning would have been nice, she grumbled. Yoruchi stopped her purring to eye Verena. Where's the fun in that? Standing. Yoruchi began to walk towards the Shoten porch where Rukia was waiting for Verena. Khan opened the door just in time for them to hear Ichigo yell, "No way. She's not staying at my home." Kurosaki-Urahara tried to calm the orange-haired teen down. No. Ichigo growled at him. Verena walked in, passing Rukia, who was standing in the doorway of the Shoten. Walking up to her brother, who was still in spirit form, she grasped his Shihakusho by the back and threw him towards Khan. Get in your damn body, Ichi, then we'll talk. Ichigo looked at her with wide eyes as he sat on the floor where he'd landed. Sis, he questioned her. Looking behind him, he saw both Khan and Rukia. Ichigo Khan began but was interrupted when Ichigo stood up and knocked on the back of his head causing Khan's mod soul candy to pop out of Ichigo's body's mouth. Once Ichigo was back in his body, he looked at his sister and was about to speak when she beat him to it. "Shut it, Ichi." She turned her attention towards Urahara, who looked a bit nervous at the glare that was presently on her face. "Why does Rukia have to stay with us, other you not wanting her around here?" Urahara sighed. "It's not that I don't want her here, it's the fact that if she's caught with me, she will get into trouble," he told her sincerely. "However, if she's with you too, she might be able to learn that not everything she's heard about Quincy/Shinigami relations is true." He pushed his hat up slightly so that his eyes were a bit more visible. "Plus, I think she may be able to do something I can for you." That got Ichigo's attention. "Like what?" he asked before receiving a glare from his sister to shut up. "She might be able to help you unseal your Zanpakuto," he spoke to Verena. Rubbing her bridge of her nose, Verena looked at Rukia. "We have to talk to Mom about this, but if she says yes, we have rules you must abide by," she told the raven-haired woman. Rukia blinked in surprise. "Of course," she agreed. Looking at Ichigo, Verena walked up to him before punching him in the face, causing Rukia to gasp in horror. "Next time you leave me with that pervert all day, I'm going to kick your ass from one side of town to the other," she yelled at him. He frowned at her. "I had a few hollows." He began only to get her foot to his face. "I felt them," she continued to yell. "They were weak-ass hollows that you destroyed in a few minutes." Ichigo suddenly kicked her leg out from under her. "Well, I was bored," he yelled back to her after she'd fallen onto her butt. Rukia's eyes were wide in shock as the two siblings began to yell and punch at each other over something so silly. She was so distracted she might noticed Urahara had to stand beside her. "Kuchiki, I do hope you can take of them for me," he said. "As young as these two are, they may be the only difference between life and death one day for us all." Looking towards him, Rukia frowned at his words. "What do you mean?" she inquired with curiosity in her voice. Urahara pulled his hat down a bit. "You shall see," he said as he walked off towards one of the other rooms in his shoten, leaving Rukia to wonder just what he meant and how could two human children be that important. Walking home from Urahara's shoten that night was awkward as Ichigo ignored Rukia the whole way, leaving Verena to listen to her, though she really wasn't saying much. Looking towards the dark-haired girl, Verena saw that she seemed to be getting lost in her thoughts. Deciding that this could be dangerous, as Ichigo did the same thing by overthinking things, Verena wrapped an arm around Rukia's neck, pulling her towards Verena's side. "What?" Rukia cried out as she lost her balance and fell against Verena's side. "Well, since it's official," Verena began as she smiled down at Rukia. "That you're stayin' with Ichi and I, we should totally have an all-girls night." Up ahead of them Ichigo suddenly froze in mid-step. "A girls' night?" Rukia asked, curious about that prospect. "What does this entail?" "Yeah," Verena exclaimed as pure happiness seemed to be gushing from her. "We can have Tatsuki, Orihime, and our sisters join, oh. Mama too." Verena waved a finger in the air as she said each person's name as she spoke. "We'll do each other's hair, fingernails, watch girly flicks and girl talk." As the two passed Ichigo, he made a face out of the mentioned things his sister would do with Rukia. He was so going to be out of the house when they did this. "Perhaps Chad will let me crash at his place," he thought, having been to his best friend's home a few times, but he had never spent the night. "And Ichi can be our servant boy for the night," she teased Ichigo, knowing he was more than likely thinking of a way to avoid this. "No," he said sternly as a frown crossed his features. "Ah, but Ichi," she pouted at him, causing his frown to deepen. "No," he repeated vehemently. "Yuzu can make her curry," she offered, knowing he really liked their little sister's curry. Ichigo's cheeks flushed because he knew his twin was exploiting his one weakness, Yuzu's curry. His stomach rumbled at the thought of eating that. He gave a deep sigh, causing Verena to smile in victory. Fine, he mumbled in defeat as he stuffed his hands into his pockets. Amazing. Rukia thought in awe. She got him to agree even when he didn't want to do it. Her eyes were wide as she watched Ichigo pout as they walked down the street towards their home. When will we do this? She inquired, now very curious to see how servant Ichigo differed from normal Ichigo. Verena smiled. Next weekend, she said. I'll have to arrange things with the girls this week. School the next day began as normal. Kigo came into the classroom to give Ichigo his morning greeting, only to get a foot in his face. A surprised cry from across the room caused everyone to look only to see Chizuru grasp Orihime from behind, her hands landing on the young girl's breasts. It was quickly taken care of when Tatsuki hit the strawberry blonde over the head, as she pulled Orihime behind her for protection. Verena sighed deeply before shaking her head at the other girls. One would think Chizuru would learn not to mess with Orihime when Tatsuki is in the area. She thought as she took her seat next to Ichigo as Rukia took the seat ahead of her. Peering over Rukia's shoulder she found a grin appearing on her face at what she was writing. If you want to know how to talk more modern you should read a manga or two. Rukia looked over her shoulder at the orange-haired girl. Really? She asked, amazed that Verena was helping her. Sure. Verena grinned. She knew Rukia would most likely do it and not pick up that she was just kidding around. Thank you. Rukia exclaimed happily. She's too easy to pick on. Verena thought as boredom began to fill her. Tomorrow we are to go for our weekly training with Shinji and them. Wonder how we're gonna do that with Miss Soul Reaper around. She wondered as she barely paid attention to their homeroom teacher. Looking over to Ichigo she saw him grin at her. Groaning, she knew exactly what was going on. Ichigo had jumped out of his body again and Khan was left in charge again. I'll kick his ass later. Later that afternoon Ichigo was back in charge of his body when he met up with Rukia and Verena in the park. Verena was swinging around what looked like a bat and hitting balls filled with something. Verena stopped swinging the bat when she saw him. Your turn, she said as she threw him the bat. Hit the balls with faces on them, she told him. Rukia's idea of training, she explained. Ichigo gave her a confused look. You've gotta be kidding me, he asked her before looking at the scribbles on the balls. How many times, he asked with an exasperated sigh. Only 100, she replied as she sat next to Rukia who was reading a horror manga from the library. Verena still couldn't believe she had actually gotten it. Looking up into the sky Verena watched the clouds go by slowly. You do realize we've been training since we were kids, right? She asked Rukia. I did not, she answered as she continued to read her book. She was becoming really involved in the storyline. Give me the box. Sister Marianne. Now. No. We mustn't open the box. Francois. No. Rukia felt her heart begin to accelerate and just as she was about to turn the page, a voice broke her concentration. What are you doing? The deep voice asked. Ah. Rukia cried out in surprise. Both Verena and Ichigo began to laugh. Not funny. Rukia yelled at them both. Ichigo recovered first. What are you reading anyways? He asked as he went to grab the book. I'm studying up on modern speech, she stated as she pulled the book away. Ichigo caught sight of the cover. You're reading a horror manga, he said in a deadpan voice. Verena let out a snort causing her brother to look at her. Verena instantly pretended to be innocent in this. Did you hit the balls? Rukia asked as she tried to get Ichigo's attention off of her. Yeah. I'm done, he said seeming to be bored. Breaking open 100 pepper-filled balls. What kind of trading is this? He asked her. Sounds like something Getabushi would have done when we were kids. He thought as his mind was suddenly filled with an image of Urahara fan himself and laughing at them when they were kids. Across town Urahara suddenly sneezed. His eyes widening in horror. Looking around himself to be sure nobody heard him, he quickly sequestered himself away from prying eyes into his laboratory. In the kitchen Tessai heard the sudden sneeze and went off to find out who was the one who had made the noise. The thought of one of the children getting sick was something he could not handle, worse yet would be if it was his closest friend who was getting sick. Perhaps I should find one of my home remedies, just in case. He thought as he went find where he had stashed it years ago. Sneaking up behind a hollow and defeating it in on strike is the basics of defeating them. Rukia went to continue only to have Ichigo hit her on the head. "Gah!" she cried out. "What kind of coward do you take me for?" he half asked, half yelled at her. "You fight your opponent head on. Fool! Save that kind of fighting for humans," she growled at him in frustration. "Your opponents are hollows. The same rules do not apply." Ichigo grounded himself in his stance. "Perhaps, but then again I've been doing this for a while now," he glared at her. "I'm helping you, but I'm not doing it your way. I'm doing it the Kurosaki way." Rukia began only to be interrupted by a yell. "Hello Kurosaki. Aha!" Ichigo and Verena both cried out and jumped slightly as Orihime yelled at both from behind them. Ichigo, who had fallen to the ground, looked at her with surprise evident on his face. "Inoue," he questioned. "What are you doing here?" he asked as he stood back up. "Oh, I just bought some onions, butter, and bananas and gelatin for dinner," she told him. "What is she planning on doing with that?" Both of the twins thought in unison. Verena quickly pulled out her flip phone and sent Tatsuki a text about perhaps making sure Orihime had a good dinner tonight as Ichigo and Rukia spoke to the sweet girl. "What happened to your arm?" she heard Ichigo ask her. Looking up, Verena saw the bandage around Orihime's upper arm. "Oh. This?" she asked as she pointed at the bandage. "I got hit." Hit, he yelled. "By what?" "A car." "A bike?" "A car," she answered as if it was the most natural thing. Ichigo and Verena felt sweat drip down their necks. "Actually, I've been getting hit a lot by a lot of things lately," she rubbed the back of her neck nervously. "I zone out a lot." Rukia narrowed her eyes at the young girl. "So she's just an airhead." Rukia then noticed a marking on her leg. "May I see that mark on your leg?" she asked as she bent down. "Oh sure. That must have happened last night too," she mumbled as Rukia examined her leg carefully. "Does it hurt?" she asked curiously. "Oh yes. Much more than my arm," she said pointing at her arm. Ichigo questioned her. Inoue, he was about to say something when Verena beat him to it. "You should go see a doctor." Verena told her with concern in her voice. "Huh?" Orihime asked before looking at her watch. "I've gotta go. It's getting late." "In a rush?" Ichigo asked her. "Yes. Laugh hour is almost on," she stated as she turned and ran off. Verena looked between Rukia and Ichigo as they began to talk about Orihime's older brother who had died 3 years prior. The mark on Inoue's leg was concerning. It made her stomach start doing twists and she didn't like the bad feeling she was suddenly getting. Something bad was on the horizon for her dear friend and she had to be the one to stop it. Orihime had already suffered from the loss of her brother, she wouldn't let the girl suffer again if she could prevent it. Ichigo pushed the door to his bedroom open and found himself staring at the raven-haired woman Rukia, who was sitting on his bottom bunk. Really? He asked himself. Couldn't she stay in Yuzu and Karen's room? Laughter filled his head as the image of his hollow filled his vision. I'm starting to think she's got something, Fairya King. Laughter filled his mind once again for a moment. Go away. Ichigo stated, causing the albino hollow to laugh even more before the hollow vanished. Poking Rukia in the arm, causing her to look up, he spoke, pointing his thumb behind him. Get off my bed. Sorry, she mumbled, having forgotten that Ichigo slept on the bottom bunk. Opening the closet, she jumped onto the shelf-turned bed and looked out towards the two. So, she began nervously. What exactly is this girl party going to entail? Ichigo sat down looking over some homework as Verena spoke from the higher bunk. Well, I think we covered it earlier when I said we do each other's hair, makeup, nails, and probably tell ghost stories, she smiled from above. Mama knows the best ghost stories. Ichigo chuckled from below. She's got a point there, he pointed out. Only Mom can scare Verena with her stories. Verena blushed. I can't help it, she defended herself. They're scary. Yuzu and Karen haven't heard them yet, so don't ruin it for them, he warned her. Verena poked her head over the side to look down at Ichigo, her long orange hair falling like a curtain over the opening of the bunk as she did so. I wouldn't do that, she yelled. Yes you would, he yelled back before looking over the book texts he had to finish. Not on purpose, but by accident. Verena sat back up and pouted. You're mean, Ichi. Ichigo scoffed before smirking at her. Not always, he answered as he began to write the answers into the blanks on the pages he needed to finish. Silence fell over the room when suddenly Rukia's phone began to go off. At that moment both siblings sensed something coming. Shit. Verena cursed as she jumped from her bunk and ran to the door with Ichigo jumping from his body as soon as he popped Khan's soul candy into his mouth and following her to the room down from them. Rukia chased after them. Karen. Verena called out, causing her dark-haired sister to look up from her soccer magazine. Huh? She questioned when she saw Verena suddenly dove towards her, grabbing her by her arm and twisting their bodies away from her bed just as an arm crashed through the wall and destroyed her bed. What the H-? She began only to be interrupted by Ichigo crying out as he brought his sword out to cut the appendage off. Verena saw the hollow suddenly come through the wall as if it wasn't even there. Ichigo jumped backwards as the second arm of the hollow came at him to grasp at him. Go for the head. Rukia screamed from the doorway. Downstairs Masaki suddenly gave a gasp as she felt a sudden spirit pressure, something she hadn't felt for years. I don't understand. She thought when she heard a crash upstairs. What is Karen doing? Yuzu asked as she turned to go up to yell at her twin. Yuzu. Masaki cried out as she grasped her daughter's arm and pulled her away from the stairway just as there was a yell. Go for the head, the voice yelled. I know. Ichigo's voice soon followed. Masaki covered her mouth with her free hand. How can I sense a hollow? My powers are gone. She thought to herself as worry ate at her. Unbeknownst to her, Masaki wasn't just sensing hollows, but she could now hear her son while in soul form, something that should have been impossible for her. Upstairs Ichigo's sword came in contact with the mask of the hollow. Crying out he channeled his spirit pressure into Zangetsu, which caused the large sword to glow mightily. The sword went through the mask like a hot knife through butter. The hollow screamed as blood gushed from the head wound on the top of its head as the mask cracked and shattered on the left half of its face. A deep gash appearing on the hollow's face as it screamed in utter pain. Going in for the killing strike, Ichigo rushed forward with the large sword. Going in from the side the hollow suddenly dashed back out of the room, escaping through a dark portal. He got away. Rukia stated with disappointment in her voice. Ichigo frowned as she spoke. What is it, Ichi? Verena inquired as she helped Karen stand back up. That hollow, he began as he looked at her. It was Inoue's older brother. Rukia froze upon hearing this information. Are you certain? She inquired from him and got a nod from him. I told you before that sneaking up behind a hollow dash. That hollow was formerly a normal soul. Ichigo told her. I know that already. My sword purifies evil spirits which then allows a purified soul to enter soul society. Rukia looked at him with an impressed look upon her face. I do pay attention to what Getabushi says, he mumbled, a hint of redness crossing his cheeks. Verena sighed. We've told you, Getabushi has been training us since we were kids. She then looked towards Ichigo. Do you think it's going to go after Orihime now? More than likely. Ichigo told her as he looked towards Karen. You okay? Karen gave a nod. Yeah, but why did it attack me? She asked him. Your spirit pressure. Rukia told the younger girl. It must have sensed it, and because it did not get you, it's going after the next best thing. The one thing that it cared for most in this life. Inoue is in danger. Ichi. Verena pulled out her flipped phone and began to text someone. What are you doing? Ichigo asked as he opened the window in his little sister's room. Texting Tatsuki, she told him, causing him to look at her. Because she's with Orihime. Ichigo's eyes widened as he gave a sudden jump out of the window, engaging flash step as he did so. Verena jumped from the window as well, only because she was still in her human form. She engaged her Quincy ability of Hirenkyaku, which was the Quincy version of flash step. The two siblings quickly vanishing into the night, leaving a fuming Rukia behind. Tatsuki had come over to Orihime's place after having been told by Verena that their friend was hurt and had been acting oddly at the park. When she had arrived, she had found Inoue about to make herself one of her crazy concoctions. Tatsuki had saved the other girl the trouble of cooking by bringing over some of her mother's home cooking. It was then that Orihime gave her a recount of what had happened at the park when she'd seen the Kurosaki twins with the new exchange student, Rukia Kachiki. I can't believe you gave up a perfect moment like that, she complained slightly. You see a moment like that and you must go for it. Go. Orihime inquired, quite confused what her friend meant. I mean, you scared him when you could have tackled him and taken him down, she bemoaned at missing that perfect moment herself. Orihime felt her cheeks light up on fire. Tatsuki, she cried out in embarrassment. The other girl started laughing at her friend's embarrassment. Orihime, come on. It would have been perfect, she laughed when suddenly her phone began to go off. Huh, she looked at the message and saw a dozen texts saying the same thing. Get yourself and Orihime out of there. Now. Sweat dripped down her back. Verena never sent texts like that unless they were important, but what could be so important that she'd type something like this? Orihime dash, she began when she heard a screaming sound that did not sound human at all. What the? She stood up suddenly, causing her friend, who was hearing it as well, to look at her curiously. We need to go, she told her. Why Tatsuki? Orihime inquired, confused by her friend's change in what they were doing. Because Verena says we're in danger and she sees spirits, so I tend to listen to her. Tatsuki cried out as the noise suddenly stopped. Her heart was beating wildly. Turning, she grasped her friend's hand and pulled her uninjured arm. As she opened the door, there was a crashing sound just as the toy bear fell to the ground. Tatsuki had a sudden bad feeling as she pulled Orihime out of the room and down the hall towards the stairs that led to the exit. Just then the entire apartment exploded above them, causing the two girls to gasp as they fell down the final steps. Ouch! Orihime cried out as she looked at her now twisted ankle. Tatsuki helped her stand up and get away from the apartment complex just as the windows above exploded, glass raining down upon them. Suddenly they were both grabbed by the back of the shirts and pulled backwards. A large table crashed where they would have been moments ago. Behind them Verena stood over them like a guardian angel. You two okay? She asked like nothing out of the ordinary was happening. Behind her Ichigo was fighting Inoue's hollow-turned brother. The snake-like creature he had been turned into was leaving quite the path of a destruction behind him. Verena! Tatsuki cried out. What the hell is going on? She demanded, her voice carrying over the noise, causing the hollow to cry out as it spotted them. Verena touched her friend's shoulders. I'll explain later, she assured her. For now, get to my house and don't leave it. That's a 15-minute run. Tatsuki yelled at her. Verena turned away from her friend and spoke over her shoulder. Just do it, she said, sounding cold. The look in her eyes made Tatsuki realize that something bad was going on. Nodding, she grasped Oriheim's wrist and ran as fast as she could with the limping girl behind her. Ichigo jumped away from the hollow as it lashed out at him with its tail. This one is stronger than most. An Yhwach's perhaps? He wondered as he pulled his smaller sword from its sheath on his hip, ready to perform an attack to kill the monster when a white arrow flew by his head and embed itself into the hollow's shoulder. The creature retaliated by whipping its tail around blindly, destroying half of the building that had been Oriheim's home. A warning next time. Ichigo yelled out. Stop fucking around and kill that damn thing, she yelled back at him. Come on, King. Ichigo heard his hollow say as the image of old man Zangetsu appeared next to the hollow. Let's finish his, Ichigo. Old man Zangetsu said, looking semi-excited for once. Ichigo felt his power expand slightly. He knew it was dangerous to perform this attack. He'd only practiced it in his inner world and never outside it. Condensing his energy, Ichigo drew a line of energy on the horizon with the smaller sword, which was quickly divided by the larger sword. The two energies exploded into a cross-shaped attack that was sent forward as he yelled out the attack at the hollow. Getsuga Jujisho. When the light from the two attacks vanished, the hollow that had been there had been disintegrated into dust as the soul was purified by the heat of Ichigo's attack. Off in the distance, Rukia Kuchiki once more was left with more questions than answers. That attack was different from the first one she'd semi-witnessed that first night. Just how powerful is that boy? She wondered but couldn't help but smile. If he could do this in Shirkai form, she wondered what he'd do once he'd achieved his Bankai. Tatsuki was glaring at Verena during homeroom. The entire time Verena was really trying to ignore her. Thankfully Oriheim either had blocked the night before from her memory or really had forgotten it. She did remember Urahara once saying that he had a device that could erase memories. The thought of her and Ichigo's creepy, but brilliant teacher going near Oriheim made her cringe slightly. He may have told them he wasn't a pervert when they were kids, but now as teens they could really see it, though it was usually directed at Yoruchi. After class, Verena found herself caught by Tatsuki and forcefully pulled into the girls' bathroom. Okay, spill it, she demanded. What the hell happened last night? Tatsuki. Oriheim cried out in shock. What? She asked from her friend angrily. Look, last night was one of those times where it's best not to question things and let it go. Verena told her, the irate girl. Not happening. Tatsuki slammed her fist onto the counter. Something was happening last night. I could feel this evil presence in Inoue's apartment, and minutes after you sent me that text you were there. You saved our asses. She looked at Verena in the eyes. I want the truth. What occurred last night and why? Verena frowned for a moment. This isn't just my story to tell. She thought. Chad has known for years, mostly because of his training with Urahara. Biting the bottom of her lip, Verena gave a nod. Come to the roof during lunch. Ichi and I will explain then. The dark-haired girl scoffed before looking away from her. You better, she mumbled as she walked away from Verena, leaving her with Oriheim, who was looking at Verena nervously. Is there something that's bothering you, Oriheim? She asked the gentle girl. Well, she began as she playing with her fingers. I know I was hurt last night when I went to bed at your home, but this morning I was better. She pointed at her ankle. Then I know something happened, but it's all jumbled up in my mind. Verena looked at her with a soft expression. Touching the other girl's shoulder, she smiled warmly at her. I promise, we'll explain it, she promised to the girl. Oriheim gave a nod. Okay, she said softly before running out of the room. You shouldn't have promised them that, a voice from one of the stalls stated. Verena jumped slightly at the sudden noise. Rukia walked out of the bathroom stall. To reveal yourselves to them would put those two in unneeded danger, she told Verena, a frown of disapproval appearing on her face. Verena was getting the feeling that Rukia would always disapprove everything she and Ichigo did. They're our friends. They already know we see spirits. She looked Rukia over. Look, in this world, friends mean something. They're important to Ichi and I. We want them to be safe, but sometimes they'll be put in danger regardless of us not telling them things, but if we train them in how to defend themselves they'll have a better chance at surviving. That's dash. Rukia was about to argue when the bell went off. I've got to get to class. Verena began to walk away. Wait. Rukia cried out as she rushed to Verena's side. I know friends are important. They're important in soul society too. Without your friends keeping watch over your back you'll be attacked from behind. Sounds more like comrades. Verena muttered, causing Rukia to frown at her. Yes, friends have your back, but they're also there to support you emotionally in life, but sometimes physically too. Physically? Rukia inquired questioningly. Verena grinned. Like if I was scared to talk to a guy I liked, it would be my close friend's job to encourage me to do so or push me, literally, to talk to him, she stated as an example. Rukia looked at her nervously. I don't think I've had those kinds of relationships before, she said before she recalled her red-haired friend. Well, there was Rinji, she said thinking out loud. Verena raised an eyebrow. Was he a love interest or just a friend, she inquired with a wide grin. A friend. Rukia cried out in surprise as a blush rose up across her cheeks. Verena laughed as she opened the classroom door. Just checking, she yelled at her as she took her seat for the next period. As the lunch bell rang, Verena finally got to pull Ichigo to the side near his locker. What do you want, Veer? He inquired as he pulled out his lunch. Tatsuki and Orihime want the truth about last night, she told him, gaining a surprised look from him. I guess I should be surprised, he said as he scratched the back of his neck before releasing a deep sigh. Chad knows. I suppose they should too. He looked off the side towards Chad, who was surrounded by Kigo and Mizuiro on either side of him, though it was Kigo who seemed to be the only one talking. When did they want to talk? Now, she answered as she went to grab her lunch out of her locker that was across from his. He looked at her with wide eyes. Now? He asked, having been wanting to actually eat today. Yep, she answered him as she began to leave the room and walk towards the stairway towards the roof. She heard Ichigo's slow steps behind her and knew he was afraid Tatsuki was going to beat the scrap out of him for this. She smirked at that thought. Tatsuki had been their friend for years. It was doubtful she'd hurt either of them very badly, if ever. When the two got to the roof they found it empty except for Tatsuki and Orihime, who standing near the chair-linked fence near the edge of the roof. Yo! Ichigo greeted Tatsuki, who gave him a smile back. I hear you want the truth. Yeah, she said with a nod, a frown was still on her face. Ichigo took a deep breath before releasing it in a long-winded sigh. Okay, he agreed. You know sis and I see spirits. Sure. Tatsuki said with a nod. You've said that since elementary. Last night an evil spirit called a hollow tried to attack Karen. Ichigo said with some worry etching into his features. Ichi fought off the spirit. Verena added. But it looked familiar, he said nervously as he looked towards Orihime. I'm sorry, but it was Inoue's brother. His spirit had turned evil and after leaving my home. He went to hers to hurt her. My brother would never hurt me though. Orihime yelled out as she tried to defend her brother. When he was human he wouldn't have, but he wasn't human, he said as he stuffed his hand into his pocket as he sat his lunch on the ground. As a hollow he wasn't a human spirit any longer and needed to be purified in order for his soul to return as it once was. He tried to explain, though a deeper explanation would need to be given later on. So Orihime's brother was the one to completely destroy her apartment? Tatsuki asked with doubt in her voice. Ichigo may have helped in that. Verena joked with a grin. Ichigo looked away nervously. I already asked Mom if Inoue could stay until her apartment complex is rebuilt, he told them. Of course she's staying. Verena stated matter-of-factly. My brother can't purify a hollow without doing damage. Really? Tatsuki asked with a grin spreading across her face. Remember the blackout that covered half the city for a week last winter? She asked before pointing at Ichigo. He fought a hollow near the power station. It moved and instead of it getting hit, the generators got hit. Boom! Big explosion. She laughed at Ichigo's embarrassed flush that spread across his face. Well, you still can't use any real power yet, he challenged her. Verena scoffed. I've got my bow, she told him. I've got a sword and a big-ass arrow, he told her. The two siblings began to glare at each other, causing the two girls to look between the two. Tatsuki sighed. It may make me seem crazy, but I actually believe you, even if I can't see these spirits like you two can. I really don't know what to think. Orihime spoke softly. She was having mixed emotions about all of this. Did my brother really try to kill Ichigo's little sister and I last night? Verena walked over to Inoue. I don't blame you for feeling confused or angry over all of this, she told her friend. Whatever you decide, we won't hold it against you, even if you decide not to believe us. Ah, it's not that, she stated nervously. I'm just having a hard time believing that my brother wanted to your sister and myself. It's so out of character for him. She touched her hairpins. He always did things to make feel loved and always tried to make feel safe. For him to want to hurt me makes me wonder what made him turn his heart evil. She sighed sadly. It's just going to take me some time to get used to all of this. Verena smiled softly. That's all right. We know it's a lot to take in. She then went to sit down to eat her lunch when Tatsuki spoke. So are we still on for this weekend? She inquired as she joined Verena in opening her own lunch. I've got movies we can watch. Orihime exclaimed joyfully as she too joined them on the rooftop. Ichigo sighed internally. He was glad that neither of the girls seemed to hold it against them for hiding this from them. Verena seemed equally happy as she joined in on the conversation. As Ichigo took out his lunch and joined the three girls, he wondered exactly what the weekend would hold for them. It was as the first bell rang signaling that lunch was over that Ichigo had a nagging feeling that he was forgetting something. Shrugging his shoulders, he figured it would come to him later if it was important. Later that afternoon, Ichigo seemed to remember what that day was. Training day with the Vizards. This meant that he and Verena had to find a way to ditch Rukia. Thankfully they didn't have to do anything drastic. As the end of school bell rang, the twins walked out of the schoolyard to find one Urahara Kisuke waiting for them at the gate. Good afternoon, Kurosaki, he greeted them with his usual fanfare, with his fan pulled out hiding his smile that was obviously behind it. Get a bushy. They both greeted in unison and in the same deadpan tone. Rukia walked up behind the two, her eyes widening as soon as she saw Urahara. What are you doing here? She asked. Oh, Kuchiki, he exclaimed with false surprise in his voice. I've come to get you, of course. Rukia seemed surprised by this. Before you ask, it's to test your powers and see if your Ryatsu has returned. It hasn't, she told him in a matter-of-factly tone. Oh, he asked. It should have begun to by now. In fact, it should be leveling out to your normal output. For it to not be doing so means that something terribly wrong could be going on. He grabbed her wrist. Kurosaki, I'm sure you two don't mind me borrowing her, do you? He winked at them before pulling Rukia up next to him. Both of the twins blinked in surprise as Rukia was suddenly being dragged off by the eccentric man that they'd called teacher for the last 6 years. Seems like Kisuke had taken the Shinigami away. A voice behind them spoke. Turning around, Ichigo smirked as he spotted Yuryu Ishida standing behind them with Chad only a few feet from them. Yo, Yuryu. It's Ishida at school, you idiot, he stated with mild annoyance in his voice. You're our cousin. Ichigo said. As family I can call you whatever I want. His voice was challenging, causing Yuryu to get upset. Ichi, stop. Verena told her brother as she looked at him over her shoulder. We're going to be late. I don't want to deal with a pissed-off Hiyori. Hiyori is always pissed off, he grumbled as he eyed Chad. You coming, Chad? The larger, darker-skinned boy shook his head. Not today. I have things to do. Where are you two off to? Tatsuki's voice caught them all off guard, causing the two other boys to look at her and Orihime nervously. Training. Ichigo answered with a grin. Tatsuki grinned back. Oh. With ghosts? She asked. Please be careful, Kurosaki. Orihime fretted. She still wasn't certain about everything she'd been told about her older brother, but it sounded to her that it was dangerous in what the two Kurosaki twins did. Verena smiled at the blush on Orihime's face. Would you two like to come? She inquired, gaining a nervous look from her brother. What? Hiyori hates people, he stated. Especially when it comes to normal people. Sounds like this Hiyori needs an ass whoopin'. Tatsuki joked, gaining a chuckle from Ichigo. If you could see her, I'd love to watch you kick her ass, he told her before shrugging. But you can't. Neither of you can. He gave them a rare true smile. I'll see you both later. He turned away from them and followed Verena off to the warehouse district. Shinji was waiting at the entrance of the warehouse with a mildly annoyed-looking Hiyori who threw her shoe at Ichigo the moment she saw him. You idiot, she screamed at him. What do you think you have been doing? After years of practice and years of being hit by the offending shoe, Ichigo caught it in mid-air with practiced ease. What are you so upset about? He asked her as he threw her shoe into the warehouse behind her. What am I upset about? She half-asked, half-screamed at him. You fucking idiot lit up the entire skyline last night. Oh. That, he said as if just remembering it. Stopping in front of her, Ichigo sighed. I had no choice. It was that or use my Getsuga. Hiyori seemed to not like that answer as she tackled him immediately. You're going to bring Soul Society down upon us, she screamed as she began punching at Ichigo. Verena walked up next to Shinji to watch the two for a moment punch and kick at each other. Hachi is downstairs, right? She asked, gaining a nod from the blonde. He always is, he replied as he decided to pull Hiyori off of their star pupil. Verena grinned at him before walking into the warehouse. Kensei looked up from the newspaper he was reading as she walked inside. Heard you two have a visitor staying at your house, he stated, causing her to pause in walking towards the stairs that led down into the training room. Mashiro suddenly jumping down from the rafters near him. A Shinigami, she asked, causing him to glare at her. You already know that, he growled with annoyance. Kensei, she cried out. Don't be mean. Verena smirked at them. Yeah, but she isn't that bad, she told them, causing both to look at her with worry. You need to be careful around them. Mashiro told her as she walked over to Verena. They might act like your friend, but given the chance they'll turn on you. For once she's right. Kensei agreed as he crossed his arms over his chest. Just don't let your guard down. I won't. Verena assured them. She doesn't approve of how Ichi and I do things. She said. Rukia is always seeming to find fault in the way Ichigo fight. I'm surprised he hasn't gotten angry enough that his hollow comes out. I do have some control, sis. Ichigo's voice sounded behind her. Looking over her shoulder, Verena saw that Shinji had Hiyori in a chokehold with her head under his arm as her hands flailed around trying to get him to let her go. Besides, he's calm as long as she doesn't threaten the girls or mom. I still find it strange how your hollow is so calm and you've hardly had any problems with him. Kensei grumbled. Ichigo grinned at him. I think it's because we've been partners since the day Pops died, he stated as he looked towards Shinji. Besides, he's kind of itching to fight someone today. It could be me, but I think he's wanting out more often. Then let's see if he's up for a challenge. Shinji said as he released Hiyori, who began gasping like someone who hadn't had air in a long while. Shinji. Are you trying to kill me? She groused. You stink, she yelled as she pointed at him. I do not, he yelled back. And people think we're bad when we fight. Verena stated as she made a face. At least you never smell, she told Ichigo, who chuckled as Shinji continued to yell at Hiyori. True, he stayed softly as he followed her down into the training room. Karen glared at Tensai as she tried, and failed, to understand what he was trying to teach her when it came to the Kido. It was hard, very hard. Condensing her spiritual energy while chanting out the words, but keeping her energy in a regulated flow was hard, especially since she was really bad at controlling how much of her energy flowed around her. Turned out she was like her older brother, or so Tensai said. Ichigo couldn't use any Kido above 35 because of how horrible of control he had over his Ryatsu, or spiritual energy. Basically, she was screwed. With sweat dripping down her forehead, Karen began chanting out another Kido-based enchantment. She wasn't even certain if she could do this correctly. She had already burnt herself once, she really didn't want to get burnt twice. This one was a low-level Bakudo spell or binding incantation that was used as support towards others. Disintegrate, you black dog of Rondinini. Look upon yourself with horror and then claw out your own throat. Bakudo number 9, Geki, she cried out as she used it on Jinta, who was suddenly engulfed in a red light and paralyzed. Yururu touched him and caused him to fall over on his side to prove that he was unable to move. Tensai nodded as she finally used one of the incantations correctly and it didn't fire back upon her. Bending over he touched the red-headed young boy. Release, he said softly, causing the binding spell to come undone. Very good, Kurosaki. Again. Jinta yelled at the older man. You've gotta be kidding me. Pushing his sunglasses up, Tensai looked at the younger boy. I never kid about Kido, he told him. Jinta felt sweat drip down the back of his neck before looking at Karen. Please don't miss, he begged her, only gain an evil grin from the dark-haired girl. Rukia sat as still as she possibly could as Urahara poked and prodded her throughout the entire afternoon. The former captain and now exile looked at the data he was receiving. The Jigai that he'd given her would power down her powers in order to hide the device he'd stored in her soul form, but it wasn't to completely take away her powers. He tapped the computer console. If her powers vanished completely she'd become human, and he knew she wouldn't enjoy that experience. Cupping his chin he tried to figure out how to gain the right balance. Typing a few more buttons, a new set of data come through giving him a new idea. Nodding he began typing into the console once again before standing up and finding a needle to inject her with a new compound that would allow some of her powers to leak through a little better, but not so much so that she'd be detected by Soul Society, just yet. That should do it, Kichiki, he told her as she continued to glare at him. And my powers should come back after this? She inquired. Your Ryatsu should stabilize to the point that your powers will fully heal, he partially lied to her before giving a deeply troubled sigh. However, there is a chance you may lose all of your powers. If that happens, you'll never be able to return to the Siratii in Soul Society. Her eyes widened at his words. Never? She inquired. Not until that body breaks down, and that could take 100 years, he told her as he sat back down in the chair by his computer. When I build things, they tend to last a very long time. He looked at her seriously. If that happens, what will you do? Rukia sighed. I'll have no choice, she told him. I'll have to integrate into the living world society. Urahara nodded. True. So very true, he told her before he turned back towards his computer screen to file away everything he'd done for the day as Rukia got up off of the table and turned to leave. Kuchiki. She turned towards him. Don't tell either Kurosaki about this. They'll end up blaming themselves somehow. Rukia gave him a nod before leaving him in his laboratory. The weekend couldn't come quick enough for Verena. She hadn't had a sleepover like this in a very long time, and with Ichigo going along with it like he was, it made things even better. As the final bell rang, Verena practically jumped out of her seat with joy. It was the start of her 3-day weekend with the girls. Looking over at Ichigo, she could tell he was both dreading this and was a bit apprehensive about it. She knew from her past sleepovers that she and Tatsuki had basically tormented Ichigo, Tatsuki more so than she had, but this time would be different. As she waited by the outside gate, Verena noticed a bunch of punks waiting around across the street. Ignoring them, she hoped they'd be gone before Ichigo arrived. Unfortunately, it seemed they were waiting for her brother, because as soon as he arrived they began to cross the street towards them. Ichigo placed himself between Verena and the 3 punks. The leader he recognized from his altercation to help Chad a few years back. "Hey, if it ain't the orange-haired rat." The skinny guy began as he looked Ichigo up and down. "Seems you grew an inch or 2 since I last saw you." Inside his inner world, White Zangetsu cracked his knuckles. He knew his king wouldn't call on his strength to take care of a bunch of pricks, but still, the Hollow really wished he could assist his king with people like these. As for Ichigo, he stayed calm on the outside, though he really wanted to kick this guy's ass. "Go away," was all he said. It was also the only warning the gangster punk was going to get from the orange-haired teen. The man chuckled as the 2 others flanked him. Verena wasn't new to fighting idiots like these, but she knew Ichigo wasn't one to fight unless someone he cared about was in danger or if he was the one about to get his ass kicked. Fortunately, it was at this time that Sato Chad came around the front gate with both Tatsuki and Orihime in tow. All 3 teens saw the situation, but it was Chad who reacted first. The tall, darker-skinned youth ran forward, and before the lanky, skinny gangster could react, he was suddenly getting a face full of fist. One of the lackeys, a fat man, went to attack Chad from behind with a pair of brass knuckles in his hands. Ichigo saw this and kicked the fat man in the face, sending him sprawling on the concrete. The third guy thought going after Verena would be a good idea. Instead, he found himself flat on his face, grasping his privates as she had kicked him between the legs as hard as she could. Tatsuki grinned and nodded at the results of the fight, as 3 men were now either unconscious or about to pass out on the pavement. "Nice kick, Verena," she praised her friend with a thumbs up. Rukia then came around the corner after having heard a commotion and came to investigate it. She really shouldn't have been surprised to find the Kurosaki twins in the middle of a fight, but what really surprised her was the Ryatsu coming from the tall youth, Sato Yasutora. The young man was always sitting behind Ichigo, but she never paid much attention to him. Now, however, she could sense something powerful coming from the young man. This shouldn't be possible. She looked between him and Ichigo. The smile on the orange-haired boy's face was nice to see. It was then something came to her. What if Ichigo is leaking his spiritual powers? Could that in fact lead to Yasutora gaining his own powers, similar to a Quincy, but not? She was curious, and this new mystery just added to the strange things that were happening around the 2 siblings. She had to talk to Urahara about this. "So what are the plans, girls?" Tatsuki inquired as they left the punks behind them. Ichigo trailing behind the 3 girls, with Rukia staying silent next to him. "Are you okay?" he asked as he kept pace with her steps, which meant they were going slower. "This world and its customs still confuse me," she told him. "From watching how girls seem to approach the boys at your school to seeing how Verena can take on a full-grown man with no problem, they seem to conflict each other. The girls act so fidgety around the boys they like, but your sister goes against the norm and does whatever she wants." Ichigo nodded. "That's Veer for ya," he said. "She's a lot like me. We both go against the norm. Hell, we're not normal. We've been able to see spirits since we were kids. I could hear my Zanpakuto since I was 9 when a hollow attacked my parents and I long ago." He saw Rukia looking at him with wide eyes. "It's how we lost my father. He was a Shinigami, which is why we're part Shinigami." "Right, you said his name was Isshin Shiba, but you go by Kurosaki to hide from his enemies." She looked up at him once again. "What enemies and where are they?" The only reason she asked was because she wanted to know if she had to be on alert. "I don't know. Mom never talks about it and Urahara keeps quiet about it, he said this with a shrug. One day I hope to figure it out, but for now, he pulled his school bag over his shoulder. I just want to get through high school. Rukia sighed as she walked next to Ichigo. They hold so much power and have such responsibility, but sometimes even I forget that they're just children. Urahara thinks I may be here longer than originally planned, she told him. So it looks like I'm going to be needs lessons on how to act human. Ichigo smirked at her words. I can give you a few pointers, he joked. I'd appreciate it, she said before they went into a easy silence. Meanwhile Tatsuki looked behind her as Orihime was telling Verena of the sweet bean whatever that she'd created for tonight. Watching how Ichigo interacted with the Kachiki girl made her grin. Yo, Verena, she began, interrupting Orihime in her description of her latest concoction. I think your brother likes the Kachiki girl. Verena looked over her shoulder and watched her brother who was looking down at Rukia as they walked side by side. I wouldn't doubt it, she replied back as she turned her focus towards her friends. She's staying with us too. Eh? Orihime inquired. Why haven't I seen her? I've been there all week. She began to fret that perhaps she'd overlooked something. Verena started to laugh. I wouldn't doubt that you have seen her, she stated. You've been too busy watching Ichigo most nights. Province's face turned bright red at being caught. Oh. Tatsuki questioned as she looked at her friend with a lecherous grin on her face. Do you have a crush on Ichigo? Orihime suddenly felt trapped. Her face was feeling overly hot. I, she stuttered. I do, she cried out, gaining Ichigo's attention from behind her. She began to feel very nervous. I like him. A lot, she whispered, feeling as if all eyes were on her. He's always been kind to me and never makes crude comments about me, and if he hears somebody doing so he stands up for me, along with Sado. They're both so kind to me and she flushed. I like him. Ichigo is kind. Yeah, my brother is kind. Verena agreed with her friend. I don't think you have much to worry about with Riku's though. Why? Tatsuki inquired as Verena took a few steps ahead of them before turning and grinning at them. She's a Shinigami, but a cool one, she stated before taking off. What? Tatsuki cried out before running after Verena with Orihime seeming to freeze up. As the two caught up to Orihime, Ichigo caught her attention. Can it be true? She wondered as she looked over towards Rukia, who seemed to be in deep thought. Is Kachiki a Shinigami? But if so, how can we see her? She wondered as she walked quietly beside Ichigo, who was now wondering what got Tatsuki so excited a few moments ago. He would have asked Orihime, but she seemed to be in deep thought. You good king? Ichigo heard his hollow speak. Yeah, why? He asked the albino being. The sun just vanished. The hollow pointed out. It comes out when you're happy, but leaves when you get sad. It rains when you're depressed though. Are you complaining? Ichigo asked. The hollow scoffed. Hell no. He yelled before going silent for a moment. The old man hates the rain. I hate when it floods. I'll try to stay happy. Ichigo told the white-haired doppelganger. I'd really like that. The hollow grinned. So are you going to cause trouble tonight? Ichigo grinned heavily. Hell yeah. He felt his hollow side suddenly grin at this. Tonight was going to be fun. A little payback for the years of torture by Tatsuki and his sister. He was going to scare them. Besides, his mother was in on his prank. He just hoped she'd be able to keep quiet about this until he did it. Verena eyed Ichigo carefully. He was being nice, way too nice to everyone. He was getting them snacks, filling their drinks, and he even let Yuzu put bows in his hair, which made him look ridiculous. Bright pink did not go with orange hair very well. Both Tatsuki and Orihime were having fun as they watched a comedy on the TV. She enjoyed the curry that Yuzu had made, though she did get some satisfaction when Rukia seemed to get red-faced at eating the spicy food. Maybe she was looking too far into things and Ichigo was genuinely being nice to ensure the girls enjoyed their first real sleepover. I don't get it, Karen said suddenly as she looked behind her at Verena. The guy likes the girl, but he's going to let her marry another guy just to let her be happy, but in doing so will make him sad. Shouldn't he fight for her? He may realize that it's a lost cause. Tatsuki told the younger girl as Orihime finished painting Rukia's nails. She's a ditz anyway for choosing the other guy over him. He's a doctor and helps the poor, but the other guy is a total loser and more than likely he's only after her money, since she makes way more than him as a lawyer. But he's a sweet guy and has his own business. Orihime pointed out. I don't think he's a loser. But he is after her money. Tatsuki challenged. Or is sleeping with her best friend. Verena added, causing everyone to look at her. Oh. My. Orihime gasped. Tatsuki blinked in surprise. I didn't think of that one, she yelled. He might be gay but overcompensating by marrying her. Ichigo put his 2 cents in. Suddenly he got 4 pillows thrown at him. Ichigo. Verena chided. Is that true? Rukia whispered, having not even thought of that one. Orihime giggled. I think so, she answered. Rukia chuckled. Nice guess, Ichigo, she told him with a thumbs up. Ichigo chuckled as he pulled one of the pillows off of his head before throwing them back at the girls. He's seen it. Verena pouted. Now the movie is ruined. Well, he didn't say if the two go through with the marriage or if she finds out and leaves him for the guy she really belongs with. Orihime stated, causing everyone to sigh. Ichigo covered his mouth as he did know the ending, but knew if he spoiled it that he'd really get it. Who wants ice cream? All eyes turned towards Masaki as she came into the room with 2 bowls of ice cream. She looked up at the movie. Oh. Have you gotten to the part where she finds out her fiancé is gay yet? Mom. Verena complained as everyone began to groan. Oops. Masaki covered her lips as she looked apologetically towards her daughter. I'm sorry, sweetie. Tatsuki clicked the movie off. Okay, that's ruined, she said as she went through the DVDs. How about The Grudge? Has anybody seen that? Is it scary? Yuzu asked. Tatsuki began. It is, and if you think you can't handle it, you can go upstairs. Karen glared at her twin. The younger of the two stuck her tongue out at her. Put it in. Yuzu commanded Tatsuki as she pulled her teddy bear close to her chest. Karen grinned as she was given her bowl of ice cream. What's this one about? Rukia asked Verena. A vengeful spirit and a curse it's put on people. Verena told her. It's spooky. She grinned when she saw Rukia lean forward to prepare herself for the movie. It was just as the movie hit the really scary part that the girls were so into the movie that they hadn't noticed that Ichigo had disappeared, or had they noticed that it was completely dark in the house except for the light coming from the television. Rukia and Orihime were so engrossed into what was happening in the movie. At the same time both Yuzu and Karen were gripping each other waiting to see what was about to happen when from behind the couch Ichigo made his move. Jumping out with a ghostly mask over his face, he roars out at the girls just as the main character is about to be killed by the ghost. Mayhem occurred afterwards with both Tatsuki and Verena kicking out at him, hitting Ichigo in the face and chest as both Orihime and Rukia cry out in fright. Yuzu screamed as Karen threw a nearby soccer ball at Ichigo's head, only to hit Verena. In the end Ichigo's hollow is left cackling as everyone is yelling at Ichigo, who is left sprawled out on the floor after being kicked by both his sister and Tatsuki. In his defense, he may not have thought this one through. A flash of light, along with a clicking sound, caught everyone's attention. The light suddenly turned on, revealing Masaki with a camera and a bright smile. Ichigo suddenly grinned up at Verena, who was rubbing the back of her head. Another click of the camera occurred before Ichigo raised his hands up and pulled both Tatsuki and Verena down onto the floor by their shirts, causing the both to land on him when he suddenly burst out laughing at the put-off look Yuzu and Karen had. Orheim began laughing as Rukia peered around the back of the couch at the orange-haired teen, a soft smile upon her lips. Another click was heard, but nobody paid it any mind as they were now enjoying themselves and getting back at Ichigo and him scaring them. Outside near the river that ran through Karakura town, a bright light exploded throughout the darkness of night as a Senkaman opened from Soul Society. A single Shinigami soldier walked out. His person was covered in a dark cloak as he raced out of the portal into the town in search of one Rukia Kuchiki to bring her back to where she belonged. A large computer covering an entire wall with a single occupant in the room watching it had numbers and figures flashing across the screen. The occupant didn't seem bothered by the large computer or the numbers, instead he was more worried about the numbers flashing across the screen of the smaller computer that was on the panel in front of him. The overly large male looked worriedly at the screen. The numbers just weren't adding up correctly and it was giving him a slight headache. The sound of the door sliding open and shut behind him had the man looking over his shoulder towards his new companion, Rin Tsubokura. "Rin, I need your assistance," he spoke, his voice shaking slightly with nervousness. The brunette held his coffee in one hand as he walked over to the larger male. "What is it, Hyosu?" he asked, his voice was even more nervous than his companion. "The numbers are not adding up correctly," he stated. "There has been a large output of spiritual pressure." "Where?" he asked, not knowing just what could cause a large output like that. His eyes running over the scans, a frown appearing on his visage. The living world in a suburb of Tokyo City. The overly large man moved his hands across the panels to zoom into the epicenter of the large output. "Karakura town. Do we have anybody monitoring that place?" he inquired as his eyes widened at the numbers that the output was giving. "This is impossible," he muttered mostly to himself. These numbers put the output at above captain class. He looked up from the papers he was looking at towards the other man. "Have you called anybody about this?" The large man began to think for a second. He had sent out an alert for Rin to come, but had he asked for anybody else? "Oh," he exclaimed as he recalled. "Third seat Lieutenant Akon." Rin gave a satisfied sigh. At least it wasn't the captain, he thought. Nodding to himself, he walked over to his seat. "Send me all the data you've collected. I'll see if I can make heads or tails out of this before Lieutenant Akon gets here." He took a sip of his now cold coffee and groaned internally at the bland taste before getting down to business. Hours after the request for the lieutenant to arrive, Akon was found going over the data that his two colleagues had discovered. The energy source had not only the power of a Shinigami that was above the captain class, but was even closer to the head captain's spiritual pressure. However, there was also a hollow undertone to the energy output along with an unknown power classification. Whoever or whatever this source was from, they were extremely powerful. He looked up from the console with the data collection on it towards the other two in the room. "I'll take this to the captain. Return to your posts and continue to monitor Karakura town." "Yes, sir." The two quickly returned to their seats to their computer monitors. Akon sighed as he straightened his back out. Picking up the papers that had the data on them, the lieutenant quickly made his way down the dark halls of the 12th. The glass windows showed that it was night outside. It was going to be another all-nighter, it would seem. He cringed at the thought of going into his captain's personal laboratory, but he needed to give under the papers for him to look over. This finding could be important. Pushing the two large double doors open that led to his captain's private laboratory, he soon found himself face to face with a skinny dark-haired girl named Nimue Kuratsuchi, who was both his captain's created daughter and the first lieutenant of the 12th. "Master Mayuri cannot be disturbed at this time," the girl spoke in a monitored voice that always gave Akon shivers that went up his spine. Ignoring her words, he handed the pages of data that had been collected. "Tell Captain Kuratsuchi that we've discovered something that needs his attention immediately," he told the girl in a tone that told her he was very serious about this. Nimue quickly looked over the pages of data, a frown appearing on her face as she did so. An energy source that is both Shinigami and hollow, but has traces of unknown power with it, she stated as looked the papers over once more. Yes, her master would be very interested in this. I'll take this with me. You can leave, she told him before pressing a button that made the floor beneath his feet suddenly vanish, causing him to drop down through the tunnel below and drop him outside of the laboratories. Turning around, Nimue followed the lights of electricity ahead of her. Her master was in the middle of another one of his experiments with his newest captured hollow. A parasitic hollow that seemed to be able to heal itself at an alarming rate. Regeneration was always a handy tool to have, and her master had taken a special interest in this particular hollow. However, this data showed something very unique. He might be interested in it. Master Mayuri, sir, she held out the papers before sitting them down behind him. Mayuri pulled the goggles he'd had over his eyes, the white makeup on his face seeming to be untouched by the goggles. What do you want, you stupid girl? He groused before picking up the papers that she'd brought for him to look at. TCH, he dismissed the papers as nothing. Third Seat Akon and his group has discovered an energy source within the living world in the city of Karakura town, she told him as she outlined what the papers said. The energy in higher than a captain class, almost to the same level as head captain Yamamoto. Mayuri, who had turned back towards the regenerating hollow, looked towards her as a sadistic grin began to cross his face. Really? He asked, sounding very interested. The levels that this being gave out were mixed with 2 types of familiar Ryatsu energy, she told him. And a third that is unknown. The scientist captain quickly picked up the papers and quickly began to scan the energy output readings and what the 3 types were and the analysis data that identified the Ryatsu as Shinigami, hollow and. His grin got broader as he realized what the third energy source was. A Quincy, he exclaimed. Shinigami, hollow and Quincy. For those 3 Ryatsus to be in this single being would mean that a Shinigami had to have bred with a Quincy that had been infected with hollow Ryatsu, or even the other way around. His grin became almost feral at the thought of finding this being and capturing them. Do we know exactly where this being could be in that living world city? Negative, she answered and flinched at the yell she received. Idiot. Then get me more data, or better yet, bring me the creature yourself. He slammed the papers down before returning his attention to his experiment, feeling slightly pissed off at not being able to experiment on the creature with those 3 Ryatsu energies. That being would be extremely powerful and would be prize worth its weight in gold. Oh, how he couldn't wait to get his hands upon it. Nimue Kuratsuchi walked down the courtyard of the 11th Division. Fighting sounds were coming from the dojo building that held most of its members in. The extremely large amount of Ryatsu coming from the building also told her that the captain and his first lieutenant were both inside. Standing outside the building was dark-haired male with an orange turtleneck over the top half of his shihakusho and yellow feathers attached to his right eye. This was 7th Seat Yumachika Iasegawa, which mean his loud bald-headed companion was nearby. A loud yell from inside proved her right as a bald-headed man went flying over the crowd of men and landed off of the steps of the dojo. Third Seat Ikiku Madarame slowly sat up before reaching to rub the new bruise that was steadily appearing up on the top of his head. All eyes turned to the loud boisterous laugh that came out of the dojo as the rest of the men were tossed to the side like flies. You boys are filled with excitement today. The tall man with the tattered white captain's Haori spoke with a large grin on his face. Yay, Kenny! A pink-haired girl cried out with absolute joy in her voice. You beat them all. I'll beat you yet, Captain. Madarame yelled with excitement in his tone. Not yet, you won't, the captain told his third seat before he noticed Nimue. What you want? He asked her, causing everyone to take notice of the strange girl. Master Mayuri has made a request in which I will need the assistance of one of your men. She eyed the men, all of whom started looking at her nervously. That madman can shove it, the large man told her, his attitude turning hostile. Captain Kenpachi, I assure you that this isn't one of my master's dash, she began only for him to turn his back to her. Go bother squad 2, he told her, a grin appearing on his face. Go annoy Soy Fawn. Nina gave a sigh before giving a nod as she turned away from the captain of the 11th. It would have been interesting to see if the strongest Shinigami squad could take on the creature with 3 types of Ryatsu energy signatures. It didn't take her long to reach the second squad as she used Flash Step to get there. The captain of the squad was gone, as was the first lieutenant, however there were plenty of others within the stealth forces. Her target wasn't hard to find. Ikichiro Saito stood next to a gambling table and was trying to win some of his money back. He wasn't very lucky today, it would seem. As soon as he stepped away from the table, Nimue approached him. A tall dark-haired youth sat on the ground outside of the park with 2 others. With a construction site behind the fence that they were sitting next to, Saito, Chad, to his friends at school, listened intently as his frightened friend told him about the bird in the cage in the midst of them. They say it's cursed, the youth told them. I heard all of his owners died horrible deaths. So it gets passed around quickly. The blond youth on Sato's right shivered at that thought. So it's now with you, he asked. Why yeah, the dark-haired boy stuttered. So I'm really scared now, he admitted as he tore at the grass growing in between the cracks of the tile ground. So do you want it, Shigeo? The boy asked his friend, hopeful he'd take the cursed animal from him before calamity hit him. How could I after hearing that? Shigeo yelled at his friend, horrified he'd offer such a creature to him. The youth looked at Sato. What about you, Chad? He asked with an equally hopeful tone. It's cute. Idiot. Shigeo yelled. You know he can't say no to cute things like th. Suddenly behind them in the construction site a crashing sound caught their attention. When they looked up, to their horror a large beam was heading their way. Without thinking, Sato moved quickly. His years of training with Urahara had taught him to always be ready for an attack when he was outside. Standing over his friends, with his back hunched over them, the beam came crashing down against his strong body. Ch Chad, both boys yelled at their giant friend. Are you okay? The blonde asked as the other stated dumbfoundedly. You caught a falling beam on your back. It's nothing. Sato stated in a monotone voice. Compared to Urahara's training, this really wasn't anything. He'd been inches from death with the crazed teacher/scientist. This was just a scratch compared to that. Nothing. Shigeo yelled. You're bleeding. He pointed towards the cut on Chad's head. Thanks for saving me. A voice sounded, causing everyone to look at the parakeet. My name is Shibata Yuichi. What's your name? What's with this bird? Shigeo asked. It's as if it understands what's going on, the dark-haired boy stated with a frightened look. Sato Yasutora. Sato replied easily. As he reached out his senses towards the bird, he gave a nod. There was more to this animal than meets the eye. Huh? The blonde looked towards his friend. Chad's responding to the bird. All the while the dark-haired youth felt as if his brain was going to shut down. I got that bird. He thought as he gave a groan. The next afternoon on the school roof, Ichigo was rubbing his head trying to get rid of a headache when he felt something touch his temple before the pain vanished. Looking to his right, he saw Rukia looking up at him. Better? She asked. Yeah, he touched his temple before giving a nod. How'd you do that? Keto healing arts, she stated matter-of-factly. Before frowning as she looked at the juice box in her hand. She'd used these before, but Ichigo or Verena usually opened them. How do you open these? She muttered softly, trying to not get noticed, but it was too late. Ichigo leaned back against the fence. The straw, he answered with a smirk. Straw? She questioned him as she looked up at him from the object of her ire. What's this? A gentle voice questioned, causing both to look towards the owner. Ms. Wiro. Ichigo was surprised to see his friend. You two are together again, he said as he sat by them on the ground. You two sure do get along well. He smiled at this. Ichigo frowned at him. Does this really look that way? He asked. Mizuiro chuckled. Well, if you say so, he conceded, not wanting to fight with his friend as Ichigo sat down on the ground. But you should be careful. You're sending the wrong signal to other girls. Idiot, if I cared what those girls thought, or anyone thought, I would have dyed my hair black years ago. Ichigo stated as he pulled out his juice box and stuck the straw through the hole, Rukia watching what he'd done and repeated it, triumphant at her success. That's true. Mizuiro agreed. Oh. If it isn't the beautiful transfer student, Miss Kuchiki. An ever loud, boisterous voice boomed across the rooftop causing Ichigo to groan. Kigo. Ichigo greeted his friend, even if he was a bit annoying. Why is she here? He asked the other two. And where's Chad? Ichigo is wooing her. Mizuiro teased, gaining a sputter out of the orange-haired youth. I am not. Ichigo yelled as his face heated up. Rukia covered her mouth to hide her laughter at this. Ichigo was being ganged up and teased by the two human boys. It was quite the sight to see. Out of the corner of her eye, Rukia saw somebody approaching them but ignored them for the entertainment in front of her when suddenly that person kicked Kigo in the back, causing the young man to stumble forward. Whoa! Kigo cried out in surprise as he went flying forward, oh my, to be caught by Ichigo's quick reflexes. Ouch! What are you? Do? Kigo froze as he caught sight of who it was that had kicked him. Yo, Kurosaki. A mean older-looking teen greeted them roughly. Oh. Oashima. Kigo said the man's name nervously. They lifted your suspension early. He felt his throat tighten as he looked at the older teen. I'm talking to you, maggot, the other growled, causing Kigo to whimper away from him. Behind him a second teen appeared, this one with darker hair. Hey Kurosaki, when are you gonna to dye your hair? Ichigo continued to sip his drink before speaking. With that bleached hair of yours and drooping eyes, you'd think you were copying me, he stated, which began to anger the other. Getting annoyed, Ichigo glared at the other. Shut up. How many times do I have to tell you? This is my nature hair color and I'm not copying you. He then smirked, his next statement would have his inner hollow cackling for the next day or two. Do something about your own hair, chicken head. Go lay an egg. You bastard, the skinny delinquent screamed at him. Please, don't fight. Kigo pleaded between the two. We already know how strong you are. We can't beat you. Get lost, Asano, you little weak bitch. Oashima growled at the younger teen. Don't be stupid. Ichigo muttered as he stood up with Rukia standing next to him. I'm 1,000 times stronger than that weak baby chicken. Bastard. Oashima yelled as he reached into his shirt to grab something inside. The piece shone brightly in the sunlight. I knew one day I'd have to settle things with you, good for nothing. Once the device was on his hand, he lifted it to strike fear into the orange-haired teen. I'm gonna kick your arse. Iron knuckles. Kigo gasped loudly. Did he just say your arse? Ichigo wondered, gaining more cackles from his hollow as he was certain the old man was shaking his head at this situation. Is nobody going to make fun of that statement? Mizuiro asked himself before looking around. Guess not. It's too late to. Oashima didn't get a chance to finish when suddenly he was airborne and flying across the rooftop. Everyone looked from his prone form to find Tatsuki and Chad both there. Tatsuki's leg still lifted as Chad's fist was still in striking position. The other older teen ran to his friend's side. This is why I told you not to do this, Ray, he yelled as he pulled his friend by his clothes to get him away from the dangerous teens. Chad, Tatsuki. Ichigo greeted them. Ichigo. Chad and the other clasped hands in greeting. It was then Ichigo noticed something on his friend's face while Kigo was talking. Interrupting him, Ichigo spoke. You're injured, he frowned, causing Chad to look at him. What happened? My head is from a steel beam, he simply stated. My hand is when I got hit by a motorcycle this morning. He eyed the other three, ignoring Kuchiki, who seemed to be studying him. He gave Ichigo a look that stated that they needed to talk privately. Tatsuki saw the look and went to distract the others, but gave Ichigo a look that said he had to explain. I'm gonna take him to the nurse to have a look at his wounds. Ichigo lied, though the two guys bought it, Rukia didn't. As the two went down the stairway halls, Chad sat the large bag that had been on his back and opened it to reveal a birdcage. I think a hollow is trying to kill this bird, he told his friend. So it's trying to kill you too? Ichigo yelled at him. I know you like cute things, but this is ridiculous. What's ridiculous? Verina's voice caused both to look at her, the bird too. Verina suddenly felt Ryatsu coming from the bird, though it was pretty weak. It took a second before she realized something. With wide eyes she asked, so, is somebody going to explain why there's a human spirit inside the bird? She questioned, gained surprised looks from everyone in the stairway hall. I will, the parakeet said in a saddened voice as it began its tale. Listening to the spirit within the parakeet tell his story was very sad. Basically, his mother had been a murder victim by a man who had attacked her within their home, only to die when she had fallen through glass of the veranda. The boy had been tricked by the killer, who the boy had accidentally killed. The murderer made him think he could bring his mother back if he could survive 3 months in the body of the parakeet. I can't believe this. Ichigo groaned as he rubbed his hand over his face. So the killer is a hollow? He asked the parakeet. Yes, was the spirit's reply. Ichigo. Chad began when they felt something. The hollow was coming near them. Chad's eyes widened. Shit. Ichigo cursed as he popped Khan's soul candy into his mouth, appearing in his soul form just as the side of the school building fell apart. Chad grasped the bird cage to stop it from falling. Chad, run. Ichigo yelled at his friend, as the hollow appeared front of them. There you are. Ichigo commented as a grin crossed his features. A soul reaper, the hollow said before laughing out at this coincidence. Here I was hunting my latest victim and you show up. The grin on his mask seemed to get bigger. How delicious. Ichigo felt his own hollow surface slightly. Is this guy fair real king? He asked, sounding bored. Kill him. He's a weakling. Suddenly the hollow was thrown back by a kick to the head from above as Rukia jumped from the rooftop and landed on the hollow. Before she jumped back, held her hand out and recited an incantation. Mask of flesh and bone, flutter of wings, ye who bears the name of man. Truth and temperance. Upon this sinless wall of dreams unleash but slightly the wrath of your claws. Heido 33, Sokatsui. A ball of blue light flashed from her hand and hit the hollow on the back of the head. I could fire it. She thought happily. Yes. Some of my power is returning. Her thoughts came to a stop as the smoke from the attack cleared to reveal a very loaded-off hollow. What? The hollow slammed its fist into Rukia, throwing her away from it. Ugh, she groaned in pain. Shinigami power, he growled as he eyed the raven-haired girl on the ground. But yours is weak. I didn't feel a thing. The hollow burst out laughing as it went to thrust its fist into the downed Shinigami woman, only for Ichigo to use Flash Step, grab her into his arms and Flash Step away towards the parking lot. Are you okay? He asked with concern, lacing his voice. Damn. She thought as she gritted her teeth together as pain was running up and down her stomach and back. So I haven't recovered enough to use that level of power yet. She looked up towards Ichigo and saw the way he looked at her with concern. Why is he looking at me that way? Shouldn't he be more concerned about the others? I'm fine, she told him. She's Lion King. He heard his hollow say. What's more? Rukia thought as she really looked at Ichigo. I could have sworn. She pushed her senses to their limit as she tried to find that presence she had felt coming from Ichigo, but found nothing there. Right. Ichigo set her on her feet. I don't know why you're lying, but try not to get yourself killed next time. He pulled his sword from its place on his back. Another Shinigami. That explains why this place smells so good. He was practically salivating. They taste the best. So I'm guessing you're the murderer that killed that boy's mother and ultimately tied him to that body of a bird. Ichigo stated, causing Riku's to look from the hollow towards Ichigo with wide eyes. She knew she'd sensed something from the bird, but hadn't thought it was much of anything. This changed things. Oh, the hollow turned its attention back to Ichigo. So the brat told you, he scoffed. It's not like it matters now. He chuckled lightly. It was so easy to feed him that lie. All he wanted was that bitch of a mother back. I killed her, but then that boy went to stop me by grabbing my shoelaces. I died by falling over the veranda. What a damn shame too. I had plans. Ichigo scoffed at the hollow. Like I really care, he told the creature. What I care about is this game you've been playing. It's now involved me and my friends, and I can't have that. He moved his sword from his shoulder to the front of him. So I'll just get rid of you now. So you think you can do that? The hollow asked. Let's see. He held his hands out, causing wings to shoot out from his arms, and suddenly he was airborne. Ichigo grinned as he engaged Flash Step again, this time going straight up into the air. Suddenly the hollow began to fling out toad-like creatures from its body. When the creatures got near Ichigo, leeches came out of those creatures and began to explode in the air around him. When the smoke from the attack cleared, it was revealed that a glowing shield had surrounded Ichigo. Rukia turned around and saw Verena had just called out a barrier incantation to protect her brother. Verena grinned at Rukia. You're not the only one who knows Hado and Bakuto, she told the raven-haired girl. Rukia smirked. I didn't think so, she said softly as she saw Chad running towards them with what looked like a telephone pole in his arms. The two girls watched the large man launch that into the air and tear right through one of the hollow's wings in his arms. He can see hollows? Rukia asked, causing Verena to grin. That's not all he can do, she told the other before she went to assist Ichigo in killing the hollow with another incantation. Sprinkle on the bones of the beast. Sharp tower, red crystal, steel ring. Move and become the wind, stop and become the calm. Sound of warring spears fills the empty castle. Hado 63, Raikoho. A massive wave of yellow energy flew out of her hands towards the back of the hollow, causing the creature to scream out in pain as its back was burned. The scent of burnt flesh filled the air. Ichigo raised his sword up over his head and swung it down upon the hollow's head. His Ryatsu glowing bright blue as he brought his sword down upon the hollow, killing it. However, unlike the others, its body didn't disappear. What the dash? Ichigo began when suddenly two enormous red doors appeared with skeletons on them. What? Ichigo looked up at the large doors with wide eyes as a foreboding feeling filled his being. He could even feel his hollow felt nervous about these doors. What is that? Verena asked. In front of her, Chad could feel his heart accelerating at the appearance of those doors. They're the doors towards hell. Rukia told them solemnly. When a soul has done many evil things in their lives when they were living, they go to that place, not soul society, because a Zanpakuto can only cleanse that spirit of the sins it has committed after death, not before. Smoke began to come out of the doors as they began to slowly open. Look there. The gates of hell are opening, she yelled at them, causing the teens to look on in apprehension, a bit of fear coming off of both of the twins. Suddenly the hollow stood straight up as the doors were fully opened. A sword suddenly slammed through the torso of the hollow. As the hand of the being that held the sword began to pull the hollow into the gates of hell, frightening laughter could be heard. The gates then slammed shut before vanishing altogether. So that's hell. Ichigo stated, not expecting anything to be said. So what do we do about the kid? Verena asked, causing Chad to look towards her. Rukia spoke, causing everyone to look at her. I need to look at the child, she said. If his chain of fate isn't severed, then he can be returned to his body. And if it is? Chad inquired, looking worriedly at her. Then he can be taken to Soul Society, she told the larger boy. He will be all right either way. Chad gave a nod and led the group to where he had left the parakeet. The tiny bird looked up as the group came into view. Mister, he cried out happily as he saw that his friend was still alive. Flapping his wings excitedly, he hopped on the swing in the cage. You're all right. Chad gave a nod at the parakeet, the child's spirit seeming to be very happy. Well? Ichigo's voice sounded, causing Chad to look towards his friend. How is it? It's a shame, but, Rukia began as she examined the spirit inside of the bird. The chain of fate has already been disconnected. No traces of it are left. Too much time has passed. She looked at the bird. It's impossible for you to return to your body. No way, the bird began to cry lightly at this revelation. Shibata. Chad whispered the child's name. Don't worry. Rukia exclaimed, surprising the boy a bit. Soul Society is a place where you have nothing to be afraid of. She suddenly looked a bit nervous as Ichigo stared at her with a non-believing looking. Such as never being hungry. Your body feels light, and it's 9 out of 10 times better than this world. You don't say. Ichigo asked as he tried to believe that on but couldn't, especially with all the complaints he'd heard about Soul Society from Shinji and them. Rukia gave him a look that said, please go along with this. But that may be so. He smiled at the parakeet that was looking up at him. At least if you go to the other world you can see your mom again. That's right. Rukia said excitedly as she turned away from Ichigo towards the spirit-inhabited bird. It's not impossible for her to have gone there, so if you go as well, you'll be able to look for her. Ichigo smiled friendly at the bird child. This time, your mom will be waiting for you. This perked the spirit child up. So, should we send your soul off now? Yeah, the child seemed happy before looking towards Chad. Mister. Thank you for everything. Ichem. It was nothing. Chad said as he leaned against the back fence behind the school. Because you carried me around I never got hurt. The bird flapped its wings as it tried to get across how much this meant to him. Chad hummed in acknowledgement as he gave a nod. It was nothing. Seeming to give up, the boy responded. Well, I should get going. Yuchi. Chad called out the boy's name as the spirit left the bird's body. When I go over there, is it alright if I carry you around one more time? The boy beamed with happiness at this. Sure, he exclaimed happily. Ichigo smiled softly at the boy. Are you ready? He asked as he turned the butt of his sword towards the child, ready to console him. The boy grinned up at him. Yeah, he said happily. As Ichigo's sword touched the child's forehead, a brilliant blue light erupted around the spirit before it turned into soul particles that drifted up towards the sky in the form of a black swallowtail butterfly. On the edge of town, Ikichiro Saido, stealth officer sent to Karakura town to investigate the mysterious Ryatsu that had appeared, but then disappeared, was scanning the entire town with a device that Lieutenant Namu had given him that would tell him where this energy source was. The screen upon the device gave a beep, causing him to examine it. Frowning, he saw that the educational buildings were covered by the mysterious Ryatsu, so was a huge location in the residential area, along with an area near the river and bridges, but what got his attention was an area near the docks and industrial buildings near the putter edge of town. Smiling, he began chuckling as he pulled his Amagasa hat down to cover his face a bit more. I always love a challenge, he said to himself as he jumped from the tree limb he'd been sitting on. Let's just see if I can find this energy source in record time. Engaging his fastest flash step, he headed towards the first place on the map, the deserted industrial sector. Ichigo was sitting on his bed finishing up some homework when the memory of the afternoon before popped into his head. The fight with the Hollow and seeing Hell's Gates open for the first time ever. In the years since I've been able to see spirits and since learning to fight with Getabushi, I've never seen anything as creepy as that. Creepy? His Hollow asked. More like downright wrong. I felt as if something was gonna jump out and grab at me. That shit shouldn't exist. Ichigo grinned wryly at that. Like you should? He asked the albino Hollow. Okay, I'll be the first to admit that maybe I shouldn't be in your inner world. The Hollow grinned at his king. But if I just up and left you, you'd be bored. Ichigo coughed to cover up a laugh. True, though I'm certain I'd find something to entertain myself with. The Hollow blinked before grinning and laughing. It took Ichigo a moment to realize what his Hollow thought he meant. Not that. He felt a headache coming on as his Hollow's laughter got louder. Can't help it, King, you set yourself up for that one. The Hollow's laughter tapered off as he went to bother the older spirit within Ichigo's world. Ugh. Ichigo groaned as he fell back against his pillow. The door to the room opened to reveal both his sister and Rukia. Ichigo suddenly realized that Rukia was finally wearing something other than the school uniform. It was a cute sky blue shirt and dark pants. Was it him, or had he never noticed how cute she really was? Shaking his head to be rid of that thought, he went back to his second worst enemy, math. As Verena dug through her and Ichigo's desk, Rukia found a good spot on the floor. Once Verena turned around, she handed Rukia a book. It's an empty sketchbook, she explained. Since our project for art is to draw what we think the future holds for our town, I thought you might want to have one of these. She then opened her own sketchbook that was already particularly filled with images. Amazing. Rukia thought as she spotted several very nicely drawn landscape sketches. You're really good, she commented in hopes of making Verena feel good about herself. Verena blushed, but before she could thank her, Ichigo spoke. Veer has been drawing since she was in diapers practically. Verena glared at him angrily for revealing that to Rukia. Though she's gotten better since she took those art classes back in the 6th grade. He looked up from his homework to give Verena a soft grin. I like these drawings better than your early on ones. Verena flushed at her brother's compliments. Thanks, Ichi, she replied softly. She then stood up and looked over his shoulder. Need help? She asked, noticing what he was working on. What do you think? He asked with a roll of his eyes. That you understand very little about the new chapters, she answered as she made him move to the side and began to help him out while Rukia watched them. An hour later, the soft squeaking noise could be heard as Khan walked into the room in his lion teddy bear form. Noticing Rukia on the floor, he ran over to her. What are you drawing, sis? He asked her. Rukia looked away from her sketches towards the mod soul and frowned. This wasn't the first time the creature had called her that name. I'm drawing something for a school assignment, she told him as she tried to ignore how he seemed to stare at her. He really made her feel annoyed and upset a lot. She'd kicked him a few times at some of his more perverted moments. Oh, he said, sounding interested. Can I see? He asked as he moved closer. Lifting her book, she revealed her version of what the city could look like in the future. It kind of looked the same, except everyone looked like bunnies. Cute, he exclaimed, gaining a surprised look from her. Really? She asked, surprised that somebody actually liked her pictures. Definitely, he told her as he gave her a thumbs up. Ichigo looked over his shoulder, and as the two were talking, he snagged the book out of Rukia's hands. Why are there bunnies everywhere? He asked as he looked at the poorly drawn sketch. They're not bunnies. Rukia yelled at him in defense. They're Chappie. Chappie? Ichigo asked himself. He'd never heard of that character in anything. He looked at her questioningly as she grabbed her book back. Very imaginative. Verena said with giggle. But I don't think that's what the teacher is looking for, though she did say to use our imaginations in our designs. Veer. Ichigo began only to grimace as she squeezed his shoulder a little too tight. She's using her imagination, Ichi. She looked at him with a look that said to agree with her if he knew what was good for him. Isn't that a good thing? Why yeah, he answered nervously. Seriously King, he heard his hollow begin. Your sister is scary as fuck. Yeah. He agreed with his hollow before closing his book and leaving those two to themselves. Masaki looked up from her cooking when the doorbell rang out front. I'll get it. Yuzu yelled, leaving Karen to push pause on the video game the two were playing. Spotting Ichigo, she gave her son a soft smile as he came around to sit at the breakfast nook to watch her make the dumplings for the soup she was making. Smells good, he commented as he could smell the different spices cooking in the broth. She gave a slight giggle. Your father used to love this dish, she told him. Dumpling soup was his favorite, though he did say he loved everything I cooked, therefore everything was his favorite. Ichigo smiled at her as she spoke about his father. She rarely talked about before they married, and it was ever rarer for her to talk about his father's favorite things. What was his favorite sport, Mom? Karen asked from the sofa. Masaki touched a finger to her chin. Well, I'm not really sure. Karen deflated at this. Upon seeing his sister's upset expression, Ichigo began to think back. Soccer. Ichigo answered. He took Veer and I to a game once before you and Yuzu were born. It was when Mom was sick and couldn't take having 2 3-year-olds yelling about everything. He saw Karen light up at this. He also liked watching the sword fights at festivals. That's true. Masaki said with a nod upon remembering that one. Mom. Yuzu called out, causing her and Ichigo to look over towards the entrance hall, only to see Urahara standing behind her. Evening, he exclaimed as he lifted his hat off of his head before replacing it. Get a bushi. Ichigo greeted him. My, what smells so good? He asked with a smile as he walked into the room. It was then that Ichigo noticed that the blonde was missing his shoes. Something is going on, King. The hollow told him. Ichigo agreed with that wholeheartedly. In the 6 years he'd known the older man, Kisuk had only been to their home once, and that was the week that their father had died. Is something wrong? Ichigo asked him, his eyes meeting those of the shopkeepers. Not at all. Urahara dismissed his fears, but the frown didn't disappear from Ichigo's face. Ichigo. His mother's voice caught his attention. Turning his head towards her, he saw that she was looking a bit nervous. I asked him to come here, she said. All thoughts came to a screeching halt. Huh? He asked. Oh. The hollow said. What? Ichigo asked him. The hollow looked away with a wry grin. Nothing. The hollow quickly went silent. Ichigo's frown deepened. Why? He asked her, trying to understand. Something I'm curious about too. Urahara watched Yuzu walk back over to the couch next to Karen, who was watching intently. Well. Masaki began nervously when something clicked in Ichigo's mind. Don't tell me you've developed feelings for this weirdo, he pointed towards Urahara. Kisuk looked a bit surprised at this one. Ichigo. Masaki cried out in surprise, her cheeks flushed. Oh goodness. No, honey, that's not it. She began to laugh lightly as Urahara flushed, mostly in embarrassment. When Masaki calmed down, she saw grins on all 3 children's faces. What? She asked them. You haven't laughed like that since Pops died. Ichigo stated, causing her to smile. My children have such imaginations, she said as she shook her head. As I was about to say, she looked towards the exiled, agonizing. I think my powers might be coming back. I can sense Ryatsu better than before. Strong spirits I've been able to see once more. I know for a fact that my blunt ability is gone, but I feel like I have power in me, it just doesn't feel the same as before. Urahara nodded as she spoke. When did you first notice this? He asked as he eyed Ichigo, whose eyes were wide at his mother's confession. A few weeks ago, she answered. It was weak, at first, but it's gotten stronger over the last few days. Then perhaps I should examine you, he told her. After dinner, she replied as she began to drop dumplings into the broth. I promised you a meal if you came. Urahara chuckled. Yes, you did. After dinner, both Urahara and Masaki disappeared into the closed clinic next door. Both Ichigo and Verena were waiting by the office doors with Rukia and their sisters waiting nearby. Do you think Mom's powers really are coming back? Yuzu asked Karen, who shrugged. Your mother is a Quincy, right? Rukia inquired, causing the 4 children to look at her. How did she lose them to begin with? A hollow. Ichigo answered. 20 years ago she was attacked by a hollow and began to hollowfy. Getabushi saved her by binding Pop's soul to hers. She lost everything but her blunt ability. Then Pop died. Verena stated as she leaned against the doorframe. She should have hollowfied, but somehow she didn't. She shrugged her shoulders. We don't know why. Could the hollow Ryatsu have vanished? Karen inquired as she looked between her 2 older siblings. No. Rukia answered. Ishin's soul was bound to her, but then he was killed by a hollow. Her eyes widened. The only way for her to have not turned would be if something was still bound to her. That is correct, Kuchiki. Ichigo moved away from the door as Urahara walked out. Before Ishin died he had me save Masaki once more. The only way was to dismantle his spirit and soul and place that inside of her to return her to normal, or so I thought. What do you mean? Ichigo asked as his hands turned into fists. Well, basically your mother is gaining powers similar to that of a Shinigami, he answered, shocking everyone in the room. But here's the kicker, she is also regaining her Quincy Ryatsu. So she's much like you and your sister. A Quincy/Shinigami hybrid. But one that was created, not born like us. Verena stated with a frown. Yes. Urahara answered with a nod. For now her Ryatsu is stable. I've placed blocks on her powers to ensure they don't grow too quickly for her to be able to control. Will she have to train, like me? Karen asked, a bit worried about how her mother was taking all of this. Definitely. Urahara answered. Starting tomorrow, he said as he began to leave. I promise, I won't let anything bad happen to her, he told the children before leaving. Inside the office, Masaki sniffed as she tried to control her crying. Ishin. She thought as she touched her chest. Why? You would have lived, wouldn't you have? The image of her husband's face came to the forefront of her mind. No. You wouldn't have, not if you could have saved me. Wiping her cheeks, Masaki picked up the telephone that was on the office desk and dialed a number. After a moment a male voice came over the receiver. Hello. It's me, she said softly. Masaki, what do you want? The man inquired. Something has happened to me, she said. I need to talk to you. A deep sigh could be heard. Very well, he agreed. Where and when? The park. Tomorrow when the children are at school, she answered. All right, he agreed once more. Thank you, Ryukin. Rukia's eyebrow twitched as the noise behind her continued. She usually wasn't irritated about things so easily, no matter who it was that either pointed them out or was the one irritating her. With that said, she was irritated today. Why would you ask? Ichigo. Plain and simple. He seemed to do everything possible to irritate her today. From him pointing out about her drawing skill, again, to him poking and prodding her arm whenever he'd grab her in school for no reason. She was reaching her max of this boy today. Wanna go spar today? Verena's voice pierced through Rukia's fog of irritation. Turning her head, she looked towards the other girl and gave a sigh. I do, she stated, her shoulders sagging slightly. Verena smiled at her. It'll be at Tatsuki's dojo, not Urahara's training facility, she told her, gaining a cocked eyebrow for her to say why. I've been sensing something around Tatsuki lately. I want to see what it is. She shrugged her shoulders. I just want to check up on her. Rukia recalled earlier that day that Tatsuki had been missing from the afternoon classes after having fallen asleep during the morning ones. From her observation of the girl, this was unusual behavior. Nodding, she agreed, it might be prudent to check up on her. All right, she then looked behind her at Ichigo and his friends who were following him today. They were way too noisy and Ichigo seemed to enjoy picking on the Kigo boy. It'll be just us, that way you can let go of all that annoying irritation out on me. Verena said with a knowing look in her eyes. How do you put up with the noise? Rukia inquired, truly curious how the other girl hadn't killed the boys yet. Ichigo is usually a quiet person, but add his friends into the mix and you get a bunch of noisy boys, she said. Ichigo alone is fine, but when he's like that, small doses are the best thing, otherwise, I think I might strangle his friends. She admitted the last part quietly but it still got the intended effect, which was a laugh from Rukia. Behind the girls they could hear Kigo whine loudly. Come on Ichigo, he whined. You've gotta know a few good moves, how else did you get Kuchiki to look at you the way she does? Huh? Ichigo asked confused. Rukia looks at me in no special way. Unless she's annoyed. He thought with an inward smirk. He'd be the first to admit that he was kind of going out of his way to annoy her, but her reactions were so entertaining. I'm surprised your sis hasn't knocked you one for annoying Rukia. He heard his hollow comment offhandedly. She doesn't really like her. Ichigo told the albino. You've been quiet for the past week. Something going on? Nope. The hollow said quickly before he receded back into their shared inner world. Ever since his mother's big announcement of feeling Ryatsu she'd been training daily with Urahara, but what was weird was that Yuryu had vanished from school all week long. Perhaps I should drop in on him. He suddenly stopped walking, causing the other two boys to stop and look at him. I just remembered that I have something to do, guys. He was lying, but they didn't need to know this. Perhaps we'll hang out another day. Sure. Kigo said, a bit surprised that Ichigo had forgotten to do something. After seeing him take off he looked at Mizurio. Usually he's apt to do everything on time, this is new. So, he forgot to do something, Mizurio said nonchalantly as he continued to read the book in his hand before looking up to notice that the girls had vanished. Ha! Kuchiki and Ichigo's sister are gone. Kigo turned his head quickly towards where the girls had been. What? He cried out in surprise. We've been dumped. He said this in such a shocked manner that it caused Mizurio to chuckle. It's not funny. Yes it is, he replied before heading off towards the opposite street. See you later, he yelled out as he turned down the street that would lead him home. Kigo stood in the middle of the sidewalk with a shocked look. I've been left behind. As Rukia and Verena entered the dojo, Verena waved at a couple of people. The instructor, being an older man, gave a nod towards her as she headed into the back where the living corridors were. Climbing the steps the two girls went upstairs. Knocking on a door with a pair of kickboxing gloves on it, they waited for the door to open. Verena, Rukia. Tatsuki greeted them both as she opened the door. What are you two doing here? Verena crossed her arms over her chest. Well, when you skipped afternoon classes I thought we'd come check in on you, she told her friend as she entered the room and collapsed onto Tatsuki's comfortable bed. You okay? Yeah, she stated as she pushed her bangs out of her eyes. I've been feeling weird lately is all. She sighed as she sat down next to Verena. Guess you're not up for a spar? Verena challenged, causing the other girl to grin at her. Challenge accepted. Hand to hand or kendo, she asked with an equally challenging grin. Oh. Verena asked, sounding surprised. You've begun learning kendo? Tatsuki smiled. After you and Ichigo begun talking about it back in the 7th grade, I began looking into it, she admitted. I'm still no good. I'm way better with karate. Karate it is. Verena said, deciding to do something that her friend was more familiar with. Tatsuki nodded as she led both girls downstairs into an unused room to show off that she was still better than Verena. As the 3 girls entered the room, Rukia frowned as she sensed a different kind of ryatsu beginning to emanate from Tatsuki. Ichigo felt the edge of his lips tug slightly as he saw the irritated look upon Yuryu's face as the other teen opened his apartment door. What do you want, Kurosaki? He questioned him as he pushed his glasses back up his nose, though it would fall once again in a few minutes. What? Ichigo asked, feigning innocence as he walked into the apartment. I was worried about you. TCH. Yuryu passed him by as he headed into the kitchen. I don't believe that. You probably needed a reason to get away from that Soul Reaper or something. Jeesh. Ichigo said with a sigh as he ran a hand through his bright orange hair. You know that's not true. You've been MIA for a week. It's my duty to check in on family if they go missing. Duty. Yuryu felt an eyebrow twitch. Your duty should be to keep those appalling grades of your up to where they should be. Ugh. Ichigo groaned as he flopped onto the couch. Not you too, he cried out. I got yelled at by Mom last night for my bad grades in math and history. Yuryu smirked at the admittance. Do you need a tutor? He asked with some sincerity as he handed Ichigo a cup of tea. No. I can ask Getabushi. Ichigo replied as he took the tea, though he grimaced as he realized it didn't have any sweetening in it. So why have you been missing classes? Training. Yuryu answered as he sat across from Ichigo. I began to think about those dreams you always talked about after experiencing one for myself. He pulled out a book and handed it to Ichigo. My dreams are filled with images of this man. Ichigo froze as he looked at the all-familiar image. This man? He questioned Yuryu. You've been dreaming of the same man who will kill me? Why? You tell me. Yuryu demanded. You used to talk about those dreams all the time, only to suddenly stop. Why? What do you know about this man? Ichigo growled. I know shit, he exclaimed. I stopped talking about those dreams because they're disturbing. People being killed left and right by this guy. Quincy's and Shinigami alike. He shook his head. I can't understand why I have them, but I know they're a forewarning of something bad that's going to happen. He placed the book down along with the tea. Why do you think I threw myself into training with Getabushi after Soken's death? You know very little about what it's like to be a Quincy because of that training. Yuryu stated. I'm the last true Quincy. You seem to have forgotten your heritage. Ichigo grinned up at him. I know more than you think, he warned his friend. I have 2 spirits in my inner world. My hollow and the old man. I know that. Yuryu scoffed. But did you know they're both my Zanpakuto? He asked, causing his cousin's eyes to widen. My hollow is my true Zanpakuto. The old man held my powers back because he didn't think I was ready for them, and to a point my hollow did the same. Once I accepted them both, my Shinigami, my hollow and my Quincy sides, I got stronger than I had ever been before. He stood up. So don't think that I've forgotten who I am. I know exactly who I am and what I am. Yuryu sighed. Fine. I'll drop it, he said as he looked out of his balcony window. But what do we do about that man? He asked. Even with all your power, you'll fail in fighting him. You've seen your death at his hands. Perhaps I'm meant to change that. Ichigo told him. How? Yuryu asked as he watched Ichigo walk towards the window and look out of it. I don't know, he admitted. And that scares the shit out of me. Yuryu stared at Ichigo for a moment as his mind began to think up possibilities on how to help his friend out. He would need to do a bit more of digging into his grandfather's old things. He had books filled with images of ancient texts and other things. He wasn't sure if the man he had drawn was a Shinigami or a Quincy, but one thing was certain, both he and Ichigo were connected by this man, for in his dream he had seen Ichigo's death as well. Memories. Yuryu's voice broke the silence. Could they be memories of some sort? Ichigo frowned. Like a past life, he asked. Or a future one? Yuryu stated with uncertainty in his voice. I'd have to talk to Getabushi. Ichigo said. That question is above anything I know. Probably above anything you know. Yuryu jabbed. Funny. I was thinking the same for you, he teased back, causing the other to chuckle. Are you staying for dinner? Yuryu inquired, thinking of what he had to make for them both if Ichigo stayed. No. Ichigo answered with a shake of his head. Mom is testing out a new recipe and she likes my honest answers. He noticed how Yuryu had gone silent. Added to the invite, he gave a small smile. Would you like to join us? Me eating with a Soul Reaper in the room, he asked, causing Ichigo to burst out laughing. I see your point. Ichigo turned to leave, with Yuryu following. See you at school next week? Sure. Yuryu nodded as he closed the door behind Ichigo, who was in deep thought about their conversation the whole way home. Eikichiro Saido stood in front of a dilapidated old manufacturing building. The walls were crumbling and it looked quite dangerous, on the outside. He however sensed a very strong barrier around this building. Not only that, but he sensed great power beyond it. Whoever or whatever was inside was very powerful and it really didn't want to be disturbed. It however was not the energy source he was looking for, but that didn't mean he shouldn't have this place investigated on a later date. Perhaps Captain Kairaku would like to check this place out. Just in case it'll take someone of his power to destroy whatever that is inside. He thought before quickly engaging his fastest flash step to get out of there before he was discovered by whatever was inside. Meanwhile, inside the building, 8 former captains and lieutenants waiting inside nervously. Having sensed the single Shinigami, the group waited for their discovery to be made, but as the minutes ticked by they realized that the scout must have left. This, however, made them even more nervous. It was time to move to a secondary base before they were discovered.